and welcome to episode 4 of The Smallest Thing. I'm Lisa Manterfield. I've been thinking a lot about getting back to normal, and I'm not sure what that's going to look like. There's talk of the lockdown being lifted here next month, but no one seems sure what that will mean. At what point will we go out without masks? When will we be comfortable hugging friends and family? Or going to a movie, a restaurant, or a public event? I'm also thinking about what it will take to feel comfortable getting on a flight and travelling halfway around the world to visit my 87-year-old mother. At what point will I feel certain I'm not putting her at risk? I don't have answers to any of those questions yet. I'm not sure anyone does. In this week's episode, Em has questions of her own as things start to get serious in the village. Join me after and I answer some of the questions you sent in. For now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of The Smallest Thing. Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Smallest Thing, written by Lisa Manterfield, read for you by Charlie Sanderson.
Chapter 4, Monday, July the 25th. The following morning, I throw back the sheets, ready to finish my last week of work in the Siddle family tour business. A list of tasks bounces through my mind, like the bingo balls Mr. Glover pulls for the Tuesday night games in the village hall. Last night, Ro agreed to come with me to London. Now we have to decide what to pack and what to store, given the small amount of space we will have. I need to transfer some savings to pay the deposit on the room and see if I can scrounge a set of old sheets, or if I'll need to buy new ones. We text back and forth as I dart between getting dressed, packing up my art supplies, throwing books into boxes, and fielding texts from Alice about whether she can take over my room when I'm gone. I'm so excited by the prospect of leaving. I can barely keep my thoughts in order. But as I pull on my uniform, I'm aware that something else feels different today. In my gut is a lump of regret that I didn't go to Louise's to pay my last respects to Dr. Spencer. Beside it is a nugget of sadness for the distance that's grown between Dad and me, and a small ball of worry that Deb might have left. And, burgeoning underneath all that, is a niggling feeling that something is on the brink of going wrong. All this is mixed together inside me, and yet none of it is exactly the thing that feels wrong. Outside, the atmosphere feels like a bank holiday, one of those bustling sunny Mondays when the tour buses rumble through one after the other, and parked cars squeeze into non-existent spaces, backing onto grass verges and littering the streets until the village looks more like a car park than a scenic spot. The bustle outside makes it feel like something big is happening, but it doesn't feel like something good. I pad to the landing window and pull back the curtain. A line of cars snakes through the village, just as I'd expected, but it takes me a moment to see what's wrong with the picture. The cars are facing the wrong way. It's not until I recognise Deb's parents' Mercedes that I understand what I'm looking at. These aren't tourists trying to get into Eyam. These are residents trying to get out. I pull on the rest of my clothes, run my fingers through the knots in my hair, and head downstairs to find out what's going on. The house is empty, which means Dad is undoubtedly out in the village in the thick of the melee. I jog out the front door and into the street, trying to see where everyone is going. At the bottom of the village, right by the welcome sign, is gathered a cluster of people wearing fluorescent yellow jackets. Each has police emblazoned on the back. That curve in the road is notorious for accidents, people taking the bend too fast, and the stone sign has been rebuilt several times. Judging by the number of police, this must be a bad one. I have a fleeting thought about today's visiting ladies and venture a little closer. I want to know what's happening, but I'm afraid of what I might see. After the way Dr. Spencer looked at me the night he was carried away, I don't want to be among the nosy Parkers gawking at someone on the worst or even last day of her life. Plus, if I really want to see what happened, I have no doubt I'll be able to find video online within the hour. As I turn away, a noise looms overhead. Above the church tower, is a large green helicopter, its rotors making an eerie whooping sound. All around, the leaves on the trees turn their underbellies upwards so that the green becomes silver, as if the colour has been blown away. It's a military chopper. Suddenly, the holiday atmosphere I've been sensing takes on a different meaning. The energy in the air isn't excitement. It's fear. It washes over my skin, leaving a trail of goose pimples in its wake. I turn back toward the accident scene, and that's when I spot my dad. He's standing in the middle of the street talking to someone, but the other person isn't talking back. He's shouting and flailing his arms. His body arches up, and even from this distance I can see fury radiating from him. He looks like he could kill someone, and the nearest target is my dad. I take off down the street, passing car after car, each one vaguely familiar. The occupants of some of the cars have climbed out and stand in the street looking toward the activity. I recognise some of my neighbours and someone calls my name, but I don't stop. I keep running toward my dad, and even though I have no idea what I'll do when I get there, my adrenaline keeps pushing me forward. Dad's attacker is Mr. Wainwright, the math teacher at my old school. I'm not sure I've ever heard him raise his voice before, except the one time when one of the boys in my class threw a pen at me, but hit Millie Talbot instead. I remember Mr. Wainwright losing it that day, but his yelling was a whimper compared to the fury that flushes his face now. Mrs. Wainwright stands by the open car door, and the faces of the Wainwright kids press against the window, their cheeks pale and their eyes rimmed red with tears. I cannot imagine what my dad has done to incur this wrath. "This is my family we're talking about, John," Mr. Wainwright shouts. "My kids. If your wife were here, you wouldn't think this way. It's more than a bit convenient that she's not, though, isn't it? Did you know this was coming? Did you send her away and leave the rest of us to fend for ourselves?" He pushes my dad in the chest. "Did you?" Dad takes a step back, but he keeps his balance. He holds up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I didn't know anything about it, Alan. They didn't give us any warning. If they had, do you think I'd still be here?" "It's my family," Mr. Wainwright yells, and his voice cracks. "My family." I don't know what's going on exactly, but I do know I'm missing from this discussion. Yes, Mum and Alice are away visiting Auntie Margie, but I'm not. "Dad," I say, stepping forward. "What's going on?" They both turn to look at me, but it's Mr. Wainwright who speaks. "Oh, Emma," he says, his angry mask falling to reveal a look of anguish. "Oh, no." He seems to deflate at the sight of me, and although I've somehow diffused the tension between him and Dad, his reaction gives me no peace of mind. "What's happening, Dad?" I ask. My voice is frantic and I'm scared of something I cannot see. But as I look from Mr. Wainwright to my dad, I see something that freezes me to the core. Behind the line of police officers is a row of armoured Land Rovers. They're parked end to end across the entire road into the village. On either side is a barricade. It's clear to me this is no traffic accident. "Dad?" I urge. "What is it?" My dad doesn't answer right away, but in the brief glance that flits between him and Mr. Wainwright, a whole encyclopedia of information is exchanged. And then my dad puts his arm around my shoulder and turns me away. "Take your family home, Alan," he says over his shoulder. "Get them into the house and keep them there until we get more information. I'm going to do the same." He pulls me next to him and leads me back up the street, past the row of cars. It's supposed to be a comforting gesture, but this uncharacteristic PDA is the most terrifying thing of all. "Dad," I say again, pulling away from him. "Please tell me what's happening." Dad drags his hand across his face as if wiping away something he doesn't want me to see. Underneath is a face older than I've ever seen before. They've quarantined the village, he says. This thing that's going around, it isn't the flu.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed this week's chapter. It's the one I always like to read at events because it's the moment where everything changes for Em and you need to know what she's going to do next. I hope you'll join me next week to find out. Last week, I asked you to send in questions you'd like me to answer on the show or topics you'd like to see covered. I really appreciate the response, so here goes with your questions and my answers. Renee asked, how long did it take you to write the book? It took me about 3 years to write, but I'd been thinking about it for quite a long time before then. And I knew I wanted to retell the story, but I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to do that. I wrote most of the book in a weekly writing group with Stephen Wolfson at UCLA, who is a fantastic teacher. He did lots of prompts which sparked ideas and a lot of things that come later in the book, which I can't tell you about yet because it'll spoil what happens, but a lot of things came out of those prompts. And then slowly the story started to come together and it evolved from my original idea, which was the story of Em and Ro, into what we have now. And as I was writing, I started thinking about what it would be like to be trapped in a village. Probably my own and probably every teen's experience of feeling like you don't belong and that you're destined for something else. And I wanted to get that across in the story. Also, sort of thinking about how communities react in times of tragedy. And we've seen in the past of communities really pulling together and groups of people pulling together to support one another. And that was something I really wanted to explore. And then, I think I started thinking about the things that we would lose. Of course, then we didn't have that experience that we have now, but started to think about all the things that we take for granted and our freedom of movement and supplies in our life, the ability to get basic supplies. And also I started thinking about the inability to see loved ones or to, hug our friends and family. And that feeling of loneliness and lack of human touch that would come from being in quarantine. And of course, now we're seeing that firsthand. And so a lot of that has actually become real. And the book became less about the virus and more about, the small things that we take for granted and how easily they can be lost. JC says, the book came out in 2017. You must be freaking out to see it happening. Yeah, I have to say it's been very eerie to see what is essentially a fictionalized dystopian novel become reality. There are things that weren't in our vocabulary when I wrote the book, like social distancing and contact tracing, that are now words that we use on an almost daily basis. And now, I am living this feeling, like we all are, of being trapped and feeling the emotional impact of losing our freedom and not being able to see friends and family. There were things in the book that I got right, which is, I don't know, I can't say it's great to see, but it's interesting to see that, that research was all there. I didn't make this stuff up. So things like the makeshift medical center and the contact tracing and the computer model of, the way the infection rates would spread and then diminish again, they were all there in the research that I did. But there were also things that I didn't see coming, like the hoarding of toilet paper and flour. I didn't see that coming. And also the extent of misinformation. I think we probably, in hindsight, should have seen that coming, but our inability to get any real straight facts. And then also the sort of slow lockdown that we've experienced here in the US of, slowly tightening and tightening and tightening those restrictions. And the other thing that I've really come to realize from this experience is this sort of low-grade anxiety about what's going on, that rather than a fear for our lives, which I think Em sort of experiences as her village is immediately locked down and she is trapped there, Whereas for those of us who are on lockdown who have some degree of freedom, there's sort of a low-lying anxiety of what is going to happen next. So, yeah, it's been very interesting, JC, to see this story become a reality. Jen asked a technical question. She asked, do you outline before you write? And my answer is eventually. I'm a big fan of what Anne Lamott calls the shitty first draft. So I write to find the story. I have a vague idea where I'm going and what I'm trying to say, but I like to leave space for the story to evolve as I write. And The Smallest Thing, the finished book, is vastly different from the original idea, and I'm glad for that. I use a lot of prompts, as I said, to generate ideas and subplots and things that I wouldn't have normally thought about had I just done a straight outline. There are several characters and a couple of big subplots in this book that came out of those writing prompts. And then what generally happens is I get about 3/4 of the way through the first draft and then realize what it is I'm actually trying to write about. So at that point, I do sort of a loose outline where I know there are certain points in the story that I need to hit, certain beats, if you like, if you're talking screenwriting talk. And then I start to do a storyboard. So I'll use index cards or Post-its and put a lot of those main beats and main points of the story that I want to hit on a storyboard where I can move it around. I'm also very visual, so I like to be able to see the story. And when you put it on a board, you can see if there are characters that disappear for chapters at a time or subplots that just start and then vanish. So that really helps me to be able to see the story as a whole. And then once I get into the big revision process, at that stage, I do a more bullet-pointed outline. So that's the process that I use for writing. Paulette asked, what are some of your favorite books about writing? I have a shelf full and also some classes that I've taken that have been very helpful. For example, for inspiration, I love Stephen King's On Writing. It's sort of a part memoir and part how-to. It gives really great insight into his process and is also very motivating as well. Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird is another go-to, similar thing. She really just breaks down the process and sort of the emotional process of writing. From a craft standpoint, I love Donald Marsh and all his books. Writing the Breakout Novel is a favorite. And a class that I've been taking for the last year that is proven to be really helpful as I start my next book is Nina LaCour's Slow Novel Lab. Jenny Nash is also one of my go-to people. I've worked with Jenny since my very first book. And she has an inside outline amongst other techniques that she teaches that have been really helpful to learn how to shape a novel. From a story and structure viewpoint, Lisa Crone's Story Genius is a fantastic book. Lisa really digs into the brain science behind story, which is fascinating but also very, very useful. And Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel is the book that I use to help outline once I have my story in place and I'm ready to shape it into, a true structured novel. That's my go-to book. And finally, the last question, John asks, are you Australian? And no, I'm not. I am from the UK, but I have lived in the United States for more than 25 years now. So I can forgive you, John, for wondering what on earth my mangled, messed up accent is. It is a British accent, or at least it was, but I like to call it mid-Atlantic now. So thanks for those questions. They were fun to answer. I would love to do another AMA in another few weeks. So if you have questions that you would like to know about the book, about The Smallest Thing, about writing, about my process, about my funny accent, please drop me a line. If you go to my website, lisamanterfield.com, you can submit questions there on the contact page. I will attempt to answer all questions, but if any involve spoilers for the story, I may have to hedge or pass on those because I don't want to give away what happens next. Anyway, thank you for joining me this week. It's a pleasure, as always, to speak to you. And until next week, stay safe. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Smallest Thing. To make sure you don't miss next week's episode, you can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. If you'd like to support the show, please leave a review and share this series with others you think might enjoy it. If you're on Instagram, tag me there at LisaManterfield_, or follow me on Facebook at author Lisa Manterfield and Twitter at Lisa Manterfield. My newsletter subscribers are always the first to know about my news, events, upcoming releases, giveaways, and more. Sign up for monthly delivery at lisamanterfield.com/subscribe and get your complimentary copy of Love, Loss and Letting Go, 3 of my short stories. Thanks to Justin Joseph for producing and editing this show, and to Ketsa.uk for the music. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening.